Hi, I'm Lila Collins.
I'm Emily Sanchez.
I'm Evelyn Luna.
And I'm Amarachi Otiocha. Today is April 8th, and we're coming to you from Raleigh, North Carolina. And welcome back to another episode of The Thought Experiment, where we discuss the ethical implications of scientific and biological dilemmas.
Today, we will be talking about cloning, and stick around for a representative from the bioethics community who is here to share her thoughts.
Now, cloning has been around for quite some time. For those who don't know, cloning, according to Britannica, is the process of generating a genetically identical copy of a cell or an organism. Research into cloning first started in 1885 with artificial embryo twinning, which is making twins develop artificially. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it did spark interest among the science community. Eventually, more breakthroughs would come from this field, such as the first successful nucleus transfer in 1952 and the first mammal created by embryonic nuclear transfer in 1984. But cloning didn't come into mainstream discussion until Dolly the sheep was born in 1996.
Wait, who is Dolly, and why did she make cloning so popular?
Well, to answer that, I have to tell you a story. In a secluded lab in Roslin Institute laid a single cell in a test tube. Though unassuming, this cell would later spark a huge debate about human cloning and the implication around it. You might be wondering, how could a tiny cell do that? Well, that cell wasn't an ordinary cell. That cell was an egg from a Scottish black-faced sheep whose nucleus was taken from a cell from the mammary gland of a thin Dorset sheep.
What does that mean?
Basically, the nucleus which was transferred into the mammary gland cell, and by doing that, it basically made the cell begin to make, it basically changed the functioning of the cell and began to make more clones of that, and in doing that, it helped make a clone. In non-science terms, it was a clone cell. This cell would eventually develop into Dolly the sheep, the first successful mammal to ever be cloned. With this development, questions started to arise. If you could clone a mammal like Dolly, then wouldn't it be theoretically be possible to clone humans? And just like that, Dolly was pushed to the forefront of debates surrounding cloning and its implications.
The subject of cloning continued to be heavily discussed after the incident of Dolly the sheep. I've been told that I said this wrong in the past, but the University of Utah, sorry, has a page called Why Clone. That, and it covers just that. Why you should clone. Sorry. In medicine, cloning has benefited many different aspects. The majority of our scientific discoveries have come from studying animal models, including mice. Often, genetically engineered animals are a time-intensive process. Cloning could help reduce the time needed to produce these animals. Now, this next part is all theory, but it's still important to mention it. Stem cells build, maintain, and repair the body throughout our lives. Cloning stem cells that are genetically identical to an individual could be used for medical purposes, such as growing whole organs. There is also reviving extinct animals to preserve DNA. All we would really need for that is a well-preserved source of DNA in a closely related species that is currently living to serve as a surrogate mother. Actually, in 2009, scientists were almost successful with this, using goats as eggs donors. They made several clones of wild mountain goats called the Bocado. Another one, it's Burcardo? Can someone else say that?
Well, I don't really know how to pronounce it, but I would say, well, actually, it's the same way.
Bucardo, right?
Bucardo, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Another one, though, this one is a little weird, is cloning a deceased pet. And, I mean, people taxidermy, so I guess it's not... I mean, I think it's a little weird, but I guess if you really love your pet...
Probably.
I thought cloning only worked on, like, alive things.
I'm not really sure of the details of it, but apparently if you have the money to do it, you can make a clone. Maybe they have to do it before it dies. I'm not...
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. And they actually tried this. Again, I'm not sure if it was before she died or after, but in 2001, a kid named Cece was the first ever to be cloned. And cloning livestock that are efficient producers of high-quality milk or meat has also been thrown around. Finally, controversially, humans, and the only really ethical idea that has been brought up, that people claim is ethical, is that if someone were to be infertile, that they can make clones of genius to advance society.
You mean geniuses?
I can cut this out. I'll edit this out when I messed up.
Personality.
Thanks, Amarachi. All right. So the only way that people have really been saying that people can be cloned is that if someone were infertile to make a clone of a baby, which I don't really know how ethical that is because I feel like adoption is also an option, but it's what some people are doing. And someone also proposed, some have also proposed that making clones of geniuses to advance society would be another great feat. And it is important to still consider that all this is illegal and none of this has all been like done with humans. So
But it's a possibility.
it's a possibility, but I don't know how ethical it is.
Yeah, a lot of it is very far-fetched and frankly unethical. So to talk more about the ethical and moral issues, we have to mention therapeutic cloning, reproductive cloning, and gene cloning. They are the types that are currently being researched. Reproductive cloning is probably the most debated because it aims to create a genetically identical clone of an entire organism, which is really, really shocking. But this issue makes people question the safety and efficiency of the procedure, the psychological harm, potential of exploitation, loss of genetic diversity, altered family relationships. I could go on, but it violates principles of human dignity, freedom, and equality. Now, therapeutic cloning is also something that's heavily debated because it's critiqued as it focuses on creating genetically identical cells or stem cells to treat diseases without creating a cloned person. It's debated because the process includes the potential of creating cloned humans using human eggs and the destruction of embryos.
Just to chime in, the process that's used in therapeutic cloning called somatic cell nuclear transfer was the same process developed by the scientists in Roslin Institute that was used to help clone Dolly. Fun fact.
So despite these ethical implications, it's also important to consider that cloning does have a lot of benefits to humans, and particularly in the medical field. As discussed in Kazuo Ishiguro's novel Never Let Me Go, cloning would revolutionize organ transplantation. If humans were cloned for organ harvesting, it would directly address the issue of a lack of organ donors. And this technology would be life-saving and would allow patients to receive organs that are perfectly matched to their DNA. Reproductive cloning would also provide options for people who are unable to conceive children naturally, as was mentioned before, and scientific research would be revolutionized by cloning technology, leading to breakthroughs in treatment and cures of diseases currently plaguing humanity. On the other hand, this technology could easily be exploited and used for harm. The ethical implications that Evelyn mentioned earlier of the creation of human clones are extremely important to consider, especially the human rights aspect of the issue. It's widely debated whether clones should be treated fully as humans, and even if they are, they are still at risk of facing stigma and struggles regarding their sense of self. There are also natural risks and consequences that sometimes come with cloning, sometimes leading to cloned animals having genetic mutations and abnormalities. This technology being used on humans could also pose a threat to human rights due to a lack of safety. Moving forward, policy should evolve as the cloning technology advances. Creating a full-on ban of cloning may be an extreme option at this point, but it is most definitely important to impose strict rules and regulations on this technology to ensure that there are no human rights violations or unethical experimentation. Now it's time for our special guest. Thank you so much for joining us, and please introduce yourself.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Chinyere Precious Uchua, and as a first-year human biology major, I find this topic very interesting. I'll start off with the definition and two types of cloning. Cloning is a biological process that creates a genetic copy of a cell, tissue, or organism. We have reproductive cloning, which is the production of a full human clone, and therapeutic cloning, which involves creating cloned embryos from which stem cells are harvested to grow organs or tissues. This is done by polymerase chain reaction, which is actually something I learned recently. And that process is just taking a particular DNA sequence of interest and amplifying it. So similar to cloning, it would be just producing a particular portion of the human DNA sequence that you would want to research or work with. Whenever I think of cloning, the first thing that comes to my mind are the HeLa cells. They were known as immortal because they replicated quickly and didn't die off immediately like other cells that had been intended for in vitro/test tube information and research. They were indispensable in treatment research for diseases such as AIDS, Parkinson's disease, and cancer. Despite how revolutionary these cells were, neither their owner, Henrietta Lacks, who died of cervical cancer, nor her family received any form of compensation, which is a clear breach of human rights. Henrietta Lacks had gone to Johns Hopkins University Hospital to get treated for this unknown vaginal bleeding that she was having. It turned out that was cervical cancer. It was claimed that she was treated, but she died that same year. Although before she died, the doctors in charge of treating her took some samples of her blood and conducted research on it, where they found that it had all these wonderful properties. At first, they shared it commercially for free to the entire scientific community for the sake of research, and then they started selling it more without any original patent. They did all this without informing the deceased family and giving them any form of monetary compensation. In fact, the family didn't know that these cells were being replicated in such a way. The only thing they got was being called back to get some cell samples in order to confirm if specific breaches or crossovers between some of the cells that had been airborne were still the HeLa cells or not. So the family left the hospital that day simply wondering why they'd been called in for a checkup. It wasn't until the early 2000s, after much fighting, that the families got some form of undisclosed compensation from the people who had been distributing these cells. In the same light, I believe that any attempts of cloning should involve willing adults who are educated, knowledgeable on the issue, mentally stable, and not facing life-threatening situations. These adults should also be heavily compensated for or agreed on a compensated amount for their contributions to the medical field. I also think reproductive clones, or clones made beyond the embryonic stage, which is basically the stage of cells when the egg is fertilized, because they could develop cognitive function, and creating a living being just to destroy them by removing the organs they need to survive simply seems wrong, at least to me. With all of that being said, cloning for organ harvesting seems like an incredible scientific tool that could expedite research, save lives, and heal degenerative diseases, just as long as we don't dehumanize or weaponize people because of it. Well, these are my thoughts on cloning for organ harvesting. Once again, thank you so much for having me, and have a wonderful day.
And as we've been discussing before, human cloning could potentially bring harm to the cloned individual. Lila mentioned the book Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I think that's a great example that explores the theme of human identity. So Never Let Me Go is a dystopian novel that explores the lives of clones raised for organ harvesting. It follows the main characters, Ruth, Kathy, and Tommy, through their love and friendship. And in these specific moments of the book, there are moments, or it showcases the dehumanization of them. They're raised, for some background, they're raised on a seemingly normal boarding school called Hailsham. And they have these guardians that are basically teachers. And one specifically, Miss Lucy, tells the children, after overhearing them talk about what they want to do in the future, she steps in and she yells at the children, raises her voice at them. She tells them that you're never going to do that. You'll never go to America. You won't be film stars. You won't work in supermarkets. When you become adults, you'll start to donate your vital organs, and that's what you're created to do. So she says something like that along the lines, and much of the children are shocked. But the children have been kept inside these bubbles, and Miss Lucy, she's outraged. She's very frustrated with the truth about their futures being hidden, and she strongly believes that they must know the harsh reality.
So what do the clones think? Like, they're just okay knowing that they're gonna get their, what?
Well, I think the truth has been hidden from them. They don't really know much about the cloning that's happening, because throughout the book they talk a lot about how they piece together events, basically, on what they notice is happening. Like, oh, this doesn't make sense, but why? But they do keep it quiet. Like, all these secrets are very hidden and stuff.
Oh,
So
they just think they're normal, just like everybody else.
well, they don't really know it's normal.
Oh.
Yeah, I recommend that everybody goes to read it. It's very interesting. I highly recommend it. But that's the end of our podcast episode. Thank you for joining us on exploring the bioethical issues of cloning. So I hope you learned a lot and you're able to form your own opinion on the matter. See you later.
Bye.